In this video, I've got the complete guide to using any smart turbo trainer with Zwift. Now we'll cover turbo trainer setup, installing different bike types, connectivity, calibration, firmware updates, and of course, your first ride. Everything will be put into simple terms with no waffle. Now, if you want to fully understand the smart turbo trainer and Zwift ecosystem, then you're in the right place. I've been using different smart trainers with Zwift for over 4 years now, completed training plans, I've been racing, I've made plenty of mistakes along the way, and Zwift helped me get into the best shape of my life. So hopefully my tips can help you do the same and help you get set up the right way. I have no affiliation with any of these companies. Everything in this video was purchased by me. This is just my experience after years of riding indoors. Now this is a very detailed, in-depth guide, so I've left timestamps below to help you navigate to the points that you need. What do you need to start cycling indoors on Zwift? Now I've seen loads of videos suggesting you need all kinds of fancy gear to start cycling indoors, but the reality is much simpler. You just need the bare necessities. Now first up is the turbo trainer, obviously. This video is focused on smart turbo trainers which connect to Zwift and automatically adjust resistance as you ride. They are higher end, but if you're on a budget, even a basic turbo trainer will work. They are far cheaper, but in my experiences, smart turbo trainers are 100 times better and worth the initial cost outlay. Next, you'll need a bike. You can use a bike that you already have, or you can pick up a super cheap one. It really doesn't have to be anything special because it's going to be stationary on the trainer. You'll also need a device to run Zwift, which could be your phone, a tablet, a computer, whatever you can get your hands on. However, it must have Bluetooth or AMP+, but more on connectivity later in the video. And finally, you'll need a Zwift subscription. That's it. Those are the essentials to get started. Of course, there are plenty of extras you can buy and spank your cash on, and I'll mention some of those as we go along, but honestly, I like to keep things simple and not make things too complicated by adding these barriers to entry. So let's dive into the main component, the smart turbo trainer. Now I've reviewed a few turbo trainers now, and honestly, unboxing them all is a pretty similar experience every time. You're going to get a quick start guide, which I'm sure we'll all read cover to cover, just like every manual we've ever owned. Then there's the trainer itself. This one comes with the Zwift cog pre-installed. If we're not using a turbo trainer with a Zwift cog, we'll need to install our own cassette, or we'll need a cassette. Don't worry, I'll explain all of that later in the video. Next, we've got the front and rear feet, along with the nuts and bolts to secure them in place. They usually include all the tools you need as well. There is also a quick release skewer in the box normally. This is for mounting a quick release bike to the trainer. We've got a power brick, which will likely come with adapter cables as well, one for the UK, one for the US, and an EU plug as well. And finally, there are these adapters. Now, they're important for mounting your bike into the smart turbo trainer correctly. You'll find different types of adapters. 2 for Thru-Axle bikes and 2 for quick release. Don't worry though, I'll walk through everything and show you how this works later when we install the bike into the turbo trainer. Now I'll be honest, there are loads of specs for each trainer. You can get lost research in things like maximum power output, flywheel size, max incline, power accuracy, Bluetooth, AMP+ compatibility, and even how loud the trainer is. But from my perspective, and probably the average cyclist perspective, here's what actually matters most. Reliability is a key factor. After all, you want your trainer to serve you well and last for countless miles. The size of the thing matters as well. If you want a trainer to sort of be easily storable when you're not using it, especially if it's in a tight space. Compatibility is also important. You need to make sure your bike fits and can mount onto the trainer. Now, if you have a fairly standard bike, then it's probably gonna fit. It's worth checking, and we'll cover that later. But the main takeaway here is don't get suckered in by all the marketing specs. Focus on what truly makes a difference in daily use. Now, after riding many trainers myself, you'll have to be an absolute beast to get anywhere near the max rated watts of around 2000 watts. For power accuracy, unless you are doing data-driven training or using a power meter on the road, then the accuracy of plus or minus 1 to 2.5% doesn't really make too much of a difference. When it comes to max incline, most trainers are rated for something pretty steep, 16 to 20%, but let's be honest, on Zwift, you're not going to encounter many climbs like that for any sustained time. So do focus on what matters and not make these purchases or worry too much about these really fine details that don't make too much of a difference when you're actually cycling. So now we know a little bit about what's in the box and the specs, let's get one put together. And honestly, it's pretty simple. Now, nowadays we have virtual shifting. So there is a chance you are using a Zwift cog. Now this is a single cog that comes with the turbo trainer and replaces the cassette. That means there is no need to install a cassette on the trainer itself. If you are using the Zwift cog and virtual shifting, the setup is a lot easier and requires less tools. And first what we need to do is attach the feet to the turbo trainer. Now many are like this, some are assembled already and don't need this step. Now if you're ever unsure on the orientation of the legs for your trainer, take a look at some pics of it assembled online and just copy that. Typically the widest leg should be closest to the front of the bike. This gives you extra stability. Once you get the orientation right, you can then place the bolts through and secure the legs in place. Now this is the main step in the setup basically, and it needs to be right, so take your time. It really is that simple. Now if you are not using the Zwift cog that we just mentioned, you'll need to install a cassette onto your turbo trainer. This can either be the cassette from your bike or a new one that you buy to match the one on your bike. In my experience, having a dedicated cassette for your trainer saves so much time when switching between indoor cycling and outdoor rides. Now, if you're using the cassette from your bike, the first step is to remove the rear wheel. So shift your gears into the smallest cog to make the process easier. Then undo the through-axle or quick release skewer, move the rear derailleur out of the way and carefully remove the wheel. Now we need to actually remove the cassette from your wheel. For this, you'll need 3 tools. A chain whip to grip the cassette, a cassette tool that slots into the lock ring, and a spanner. Start by gripping the cassette with a chain whip, then use a spanner and cassette tool to loosen the lock ring. This will likely be pretty tight, so you'll need to apply some force here. Now once the lock ring is loose, the cassette can be removed from the free hub. Now we can install the cassette onto the turbo trainer. Now if you're using a new cassette, this is the point you will start at. Now place all the cogs onto the trainer's free hub in the exact order they came off your bike or the order they came in the pack. This includes any really thin little spacers between each cog. These are important. You must install these for the cassette to fit correctly. Now once everything is in place, thread the lock ring onto the cassette. I like to use a cassette tool here just to get it started. Be careful as the threads are delicate and you can cross thread them. To tighten the lock ring, you grip the cassette with a chain whip again and tighten the lock ring to 40 Newton meters. What is 40 Newton meters? Now if you don't have a large torque wrench which can measure this force, here is a quick tip. If you're using a 20 centimeter spanner, about 8 inches, you'll need to apply roughly 20 kilograms, 44 pounds of force at the end of the spanner to achieve 40 Newton meters. A large torque wrench like this is about 30-40 pounds, so it's an extra cost if you want to buy one, but good if you're taking cassettes on and off. The cassette at this point should be really tight. There should be no play or side to side wobble or movement. Your cassette is now installed and you are ready to go. As virtual shifting becomes more popular with the Zwift cog, it's worth explaining how this works. Now, if you have a cassette installed on your trainer, which we've just done, you can skip this step because it's irrelevant. Now, the Zwift cog only has one gear. So instead of physically shifting, you change gears virtually within the Zwift app using the Zwift Click. The Zwift Click is a small device that has an up and down button, and these buttons give you 24 in-game virtual gears. Now this is mounted to your bars and it allows you to shift. Now we'll look at this in more detail later in the video when we actually ride, but in the box you'll find this sort of bottom mount, some rubber bands that allow you to secure the Click to your handlebars. A very important point, the Zwift Click only communicates via Bluetooth. More on full connectivity coming up, but this is important to note. Now we can look at how to install your bike into the turbo trainer. Now bike compatibility is a huge consideration and you should research whether your specific smart turbo trainer can support your bike. Now check that before you purchase. Honestly though, it's very unlikely that your bike won't work with a smart turbo trainer unless it's an ancient relic. Now whether you're using a Zwift cog or a cassette, the process is the same for installing your bike. Your bike will either have a quick release skewer or a through-axle. Now this is important and this is where we need to use the right adapters. Now smart turbo trainers, also called direct drive turbo trainers, require you to remove your rear wheel from your bike first. It essentially replaces your rear wheel. So to do that, what we're going to do is flip our bike upside down to make this easier. To remove your rear wheel, swift your chain into the smallest cog, your highest gear, as this makes the process much easier, much smoother. If your bike uses a quick release skewer, then simply open the lever loosen the bolt and carefully remove the skewer from the wheel. Don't force it, you may just need to move the jockey wheels on the rear derailleur to get the wheel out. If your bike uses a through-axle, you'll need an Allen key to loosen and remove the axle. Simply undo it and then pull it out. You then again remove the sort of rear derailleur out of the way and make sure you remove the wheel carefully. There are a couple of things to consider before we put the bike in. For the Zwift cog, Zwift recommends shifting to the middle cog on your cassette. For example, on this 10-speed bike, I'll count 5 clicks to move the derailleur to the middle cog. If you have a 12-speed bike, do 6 clicks, 8-speed, 4 clicks, and so on. Now, if you're using a cassette, you need to make sure the chain is aligned with the same cog it was on when you removed it from your wheel. Now, since we shifted to the smallest cog on our rear wheel to remove it, when we install it, we need to make sure the chain is on the smallest cog as well, so they're a match and the derailleur isn't at an angle. If you don't do these steps, then you can potentially cause some damage. Now we can actually put our bike into the trainer though, and this is where the adapters come in that are in the box. Now, the type of adapters you use depends on your bike's dropout size and the axle type. Now, for me, the quick release adapter is installed by default in the turbo trainer on the drive side. Drive side is the side your cassette is, and non-drive side is obviously the opposite. If this isn't installed already, you can find both quick release adapters. Now, they're easy to identify because they have a smaller axle width compared to through-axle adapters. So these are the adapters with a smaller hole through them. The drive side adapter can only go in one way, so you can just simply screw this in by hand and then you can tighten it up with a spanner. Nice and simple. But the non-drive side adapter can be installed in either direction, either orientation. Now, one way supports 135mm dropout width, while the other supports 130. So what is a dropout width? Now, this is the width or the distance inside the frame between the two dropouts. And we can measure this with a tape measure, a set of calipers. Now, on the discontinued Zwift hub, they had measuring cards that came with the bike as well. For this smaller 130mm dropout bike that I'm using, I need the adapter further in or further recessed, so I simply flip it around and make sure it's installed. With the adapters in place, we can then install our bike. Now, we can pull the derailleur out of the way and slide the bike into the trainer, ensuring the chain is correctly routed. Then slide the skewer in and secure everything in place. The same technique applies for 130mm and 135mm widths. Now, once the bike's in place, do a couple of pedals and do this manually with your hands so it's not too much force. That way you can check that everything's aligned, nothing's rubbing and nothing's going to break. For the through-axle, again, we have 2 adapters. We need both adapters for this setup. And remember, these are the ones with a larger hole compared to the quick release adapters. Again, the drive side adapter only goes in one way and this is screwed in place. Again, start it off by hand and then use a spanner to tighten. Now, my road bike has 142mm dropout width, which is standard for road, gravel and cyclocross bike. So if you're using one of them, you're likely going to be 142mm. The 148mm size is more for mountain bikes. I needed the orientation where it goes in more into the turbo trainer. Once both adapters are installed and in place, we're ready to slide the bike into the trainer, ensuring the chain is correctly routed again. Push the through axle through the frame and secure it in place. Through axles have a torque spec, so to be sure to follow the manufacturer's recommendations. Mine's 10 Newton meters, which isn't very tight at all, by the way. You can get a small torque wrench, pretty cheap these days. Now, once the bike's secure, check the gears again, make sure nothing's rubbing, make sure that if there is any misalignment, you are correcting that by hand, so you're not putting loads of force through with misaligned derailleur and gears. On the V2 Zwift hub, if you've got the V2, the latest one, there is left to right adjustment on the cog as well. So at this point, you can then use the left to right adjustment to get it absolutely perfect and as quiet as possible. I'm still using the V1 because, as I said earlier, I don't like spending money unnecessarily and I don't need a new one at this moment in time. So our bike's in the trainer, we're looking good. If you are using the Zwift Click, then this can be placed anywhere on your bars. But for me, I want it in the easiest possible place to change gear. Makes sense. Now, many people prefer to mount it on the hoods for casual riding, which works well, Personally, I found the best position on the inside of the right shifter. The right shifter operates the cassette at the rear, so flicking through gears on that right side feels most natural for me. You'll also want to consider your natural hand position and make sure that when the click is installed, it's not in the way. Like anything, you get used to it, it becomes second nature. Hopefully not too natural. You don't want to be thumbing your handlebars out in the real world when you need to change gear. Like anything that runs software, smart trainers and accessories need firmware updates.
Did you upgrade his software last night?
Your device may already be up to date, but it's always worth checking to make sure. Now, each company has its own app and method for updating firmware, and this isn't done through the Zwift game. If you have a Wahoo smart trainer, for example, you'll need to use the Wahoo app to check and install any updates. For Zwift products like the Zwift Click, firmware updates are managed through the Zwift Companion App. More on the Companion App in a bit, but we can check everything is okay in there. Now, I'm not going to go into loads of detail for each brand because that could be a whole video in itself. Just know that keeping your firmware up to date is another step to making sure everything works as expected. How do we actually connect the Turbo Trainer and Zwift Click to Zwift itself? To connect, the first thing you need is a device that can run Zwift. Now, a Nokia 3210 won't cut it, unfortunately, as much as they're built to last. I won't bore you with all the minimum software specs, I'll pop them on screen. But basically, Zwift runs on Mac, Windows, tablets, Apple and Android phones. The more power your device, the smoother Zwift will run. It is a game after all. Now, all of these devices need one thing, Bluetooth or AMP+. If you're using the Zwift Click, you'll need Bluetooth because it only connects via Bluetooth. If you're using a smart turbo trainer with a cassette with no Zwift Click, then you can use AMP+ or Bluetooth. They'll both work. With a compatible device in hand, in my case, my iPad, we can now download the Zwift app or software and begin the installation. Now, for mobile devices or tablets, this is done through the app stores. And for Windows or Mac, you can download it directly from the Zwift website. Now, if I'm honest, I now have a multiple screen setup, but this simple iPad setup is more realistic for someone who's just starting out. So I wanted to show that you don't need these screens, you can just have one device in front of you. Once installed, open up Zwift. Now you can either log in or create an account here. I already have an account set up, so I'm going to log straight in. If you're new, you can create an account on desktop. Once that's done, you can simply log in. You'll get a 14-day free trial, and after that, you sign your life away for £18 a month, basically. Enter your login information and Zwift will take you through the first time setup process. Now, this process is simple. It lets you set up your avatar, choose your name, adjust your personal settings. You'll also need to enter your weight and height, which are important if you plan on racing, as Zwift uses your weight to help calculate in-game speed. FTP is important, but I'll explain this later in the video. Now, part of the setup, and probably the most important point, is Zwift will ask for permission to access Bluetooth or AMP+. This will vary depending on the device you're using, but this step is crucial. If Zwift cannot access Bluetooth or AMP+, then it will not connect to your turbo trainer. So if you're having issues, this is the first place to look. So now we can open up the sensor screen where we can connect our smart turbo trainer and Zwift Click. But before we do that, we need to give the trainer some power, so plug it in. Next, I always give the pedals a spin. Some turbo trainers go into sort of standby mode, and by spinning the pedals, you're waking it up. Click on power source and you should see your trainer appear in the list. Click on it to connect. Once connected, you'll see power source, resistance and cadence are all automatically connected. This is because those are the metrics that your smart turbo trainer will measure for you. If we're using a Zwift Click, we want to connect that as well. So click on controls this time, and you might notice that the Zwift Click isn't showing up. This is because it's asleep. You need to click a gear, a button to wake it up. Once it's awake, go back into controls and it should appear in the list. Click on connect. Now, you can't really talk about Zwift without mentioning the Zwift Companion App. It's a completely separate app from Zwift itself, but it plays a crucial role in enhancing the Zwift overall experience. But just know there are features you can only access in Zwift through this app, so it's definitely worth installing. For example, registering for upcoming events, checking club information, looking at your previous ride and activities, updating firmware. There's a lot, as well as in-game controls as well. It is free to download, so have an install, take a look. You probably won't be disappointed that you got it. We need to mention calibration as well. Now, some smart turbo trainers have automatic calibration, while others require manual calibration. If it does require calibration, you'll need to perform a spin down. Now, this is either within Zwift or through the manufacturer's app. If you do it in Zwift, head back to the pairing screen where we just connected our trainer, then click on the little icon, power source. This may change over time, but something should be there to allow you to calibrate or spin down. And then you can follow the instructions on screen, which usually involve starting to pedal to reach a target speed of around 37 kilometers an hour, 23 miles per hour. Once you hit that, you stop pedaling and let the trainer coast to a stop. Zwift will confirm the calibration is complete. This may need to be completed in the designated app for your brand of turbo trainer, so do keep that in mind. Now we can go for our first ride, the thing we've all been waiting for. Now we can go into Zwift and select a route. To do this, click on routes at the top of the app. From here you can pick a world to ride in. Watopia has the most rides available, so it's a good place to start. That's where I like to go. Scroll through the list and choose a route that looks interesting. You'll see details like distance, elevation and the estimated duration for each route. Select whichever one you like. I like sand and sequoias, it's a good option. It has one decent climb as well, about 8 miles in. Now once you've chosen your route, click start ride. As you pedal for the very first time, your avatar will start to speed up on screen. You can adjust your virtual gear if you're using the Zwift Click, or your actual gear if you're using a cassette. Now in the top left corner, you'll see wattage, which represents how much power you are outputting. Cadence, which is how many times your pedals are turning per minute. If you're using the Zwift Click, you will see your virtual gear here as well. In the central bar, you'll find speed, total distance covered, elevation gain, and ride time. On the right, we've got this mini map, and this shows your current position and the elevation profile of the route. Looking ahead, we can see, for example, there is this big climb coming up. As the terrain changes as you ride, the resistance on the turbo will automatically adjust. When you hit an incline, for example, the trainer increases its resistance, making it harder to pedal. When you go downhill, the resistance eases off, allowing you to spin more freely. So now you're riding indoors for the first time. We have officially stepped into the world of Zwift. There is a lot to explore. There are two types of riding in Zwift: sim mode and erg mode. Sim mode is essentially free riding at your own pace, just like we've been doing. As the terrain changes, the resistance on your turbo trainer also changes. You can pick any route from Zwift and ride it however you like, whether that's a casual spin or a full-on effort. Simple and it's easy. Erg mode works differently from sim mode because the trainer automatically adjusts the resistance based on your workout. Now this makes it ideal for structured training sessions, and Zwift has hundreds of them to choose from. Think of erg mode like a treadmill where the speed increases and decreases automatically. You just have to run faster or slower to keep up. Now all of this resistance is specific to you. But how does a trainer know how much resistance to provide you? What's hard for one person could be easy for another. Now this is solved with an FTP test, or a functional threshold power test. And I can't really mention Zwift and getting into the Zwift ecosystem without mentioning this FTP test. Now in short, your FTP is a maximum power measured in watts that you can sustain for 1 hour. The most common way to determine your FTP in Zwift is by doing the 20-minute FTP test. Zwift then calculates the maximum power you can output for that hour from that 20-minute test, and that is what everything is based on in game, including your erg mode workouts. So they're very specific to you. What's great is that two people with completely different fitness levels can do the same workout together, and Zwift will automatically adjust the difficulty for each rider individually. So what are my top 10 tips, it's a tongue twister, for using Zwift with a smart turbo trainer? A 1-year Zwift subscription was included with my turbo trainer purchase, which made it much more appealing and cost effective. So have a look out for deals like that. Virtual shifting has 24 gears, which may be more than your actual bike, giving you more range when riding in Zwift. Swapping bikes without changing the cassette is a big bonus with the Zwift cog. Now, if you have multiple people using one trainer in your household with different cassettes, this makes it much easier. A fan isn't essential, but it helps. If you're racing or living somewhere hot, it makes a big difference. A towel is always needed. Get a load of small ones, cheap ones to catch a sweat. You will sweat. It will stop the sweat going on your bike. You can chuck it in the wash, just get a new one. Buy loads of them. When you go on Zwift, try and ride with friends on a video call. Not only does this motivate each other to actually get onto Zwift, it can stop it being boring because it's much more social training together. Friend. A good series or the second screen, like I mentioned earlier, is also good. If you mix between that and talking with your friends on video call, it's much easier to actually ride and keep riding. Keep everything in reach. There's nothing worse than starting a ride and realising your water bottle's over there, your towel's over there. It means you have to get off the trainer, stop your ride, go and get more. So make sure it's all in order before you hop on. Check your front tyre pressure. It will go down over time, so you want to keep an eye on it because you are putting weight through it still. So just make sure that's pumped up. Finally, don't stress about numbers. If you've never looked at your power output before, you can get sucked into it, start comparing your power, thinking you're amazing or you're struggling, but don't worry about it. It's all about just riding and enjoying the ride. So now you know everything about setting up your bike and getting started on Zwift with your smart turbo trainer. You can watch this video next, which is a complete guide to Zwift, looking at sort of all parts of the Zwift app and the companion app. I'll see you there.